Prince Davin was kissing my sister on the altar where he was supposed to marry me. Not a chaste familial peck, but a deep, conquering kiss that spoke of shared secrets and stolen nights. I saw it all from the proscenium arch, where I stood clutching the dragon crown I was meant to receive as his queen. He had one hand tangled in Celeste's golden hair, so like my own, and the other pressed possessively to the small of her back. They looked perfect together, a prince and his glowing bride. A tremor went through the assembled nobles, a wave of gasps and scandalized whispers. "By the gods, look!" someone hissed. "Is that the Lady Celeste?" Another voice cried out. "With the prince! What is the meaning of this?" The crown, my birthright, suddenly felt impossibly heavy. It slipped through my numb fingers and crashed to the marble floor, the sound of its fall lost in the sudden mocking toll of the cathedral bells. A bitter, metallic taste flooded my mouth. Betrayal. My legs, moving without my consent, turned me away from the spectacle, my mind rejecting the image of my fiancé and my sister entwined. I fled into the shadowed cloisters, each step a hammer blow against my composure. My white silk gown, the one I'd wear for our vows in the morning, trailed behind me like a ghost. The panicked whispers of the court followed me, sharp as daggers. Poor Princess Lyra to be dishonored so. Did you see her face? An absolute outrage. A colder, more pragmatic voice cut through the noise. "This is more than a scandal, you fool. This is war." Their words were a blur, drowned out by the thunderous fracturing of my own heart. It broke not into two neat halves, but 1,000 jagged shards, each one whispering the same terrible truth. This wasn't an impulse. This was a plan. The way she smiled against his lips, the way he held her as if he'd done it 100 times before, they had planned this all along. "Lyra, thank the gods I found you!" Lord Kale's voice cut through my daze. He appeared at my side, his face a mask of grim fury. "We have to get you out of here immediately." I gave a hollow, broken laugh. "Go where, Kale? Back to my chambers to weep into my wedding gown." "Anywhere but here," he insisted, his hand on my arm. "This is a calculated insult, a power play." "He told me he loved me," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "He swore it on his father's grave." "His words are worth as much as his honor. Nothing," Kale snarled. "He's making a direct play for the throne. Your throne." The ice in my veins began to burn, melting away the shock and leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated rage. "And my sister helps him, my own blood." "We can deal with Celeste later," Kale said, his voice dropping. "Right now, your life could be in danger. What are your commands?" My focus sharpened. The weeping girl was gone. A queen stood in her place. "The royal archives," I ordered, my voice steady and cold. "There's a reckoning to be made before the sun rises." In a secluded antechamber, I pulled the crumpled parchment from my bodice. It was the royal decree my father had forced me to sign, the cage he'd built around my birthright. My own voice was a stranger's as I read the damning words aloud, committing every line to the pyre of my memory. In the unfortunate event that the sacred union between my heir, Princess Lyra, and Prince Davin of the Southern Reach is not fully sanctified by the first light of dawn following the winter solstice, said Princess Lyra will be deemed to have failed her royal duty. I paused, taking a steadying breath before continuing the death sentence of my own reign. Consequently, she will forfeit her claim to the northern throne. All lands, titles, and authorities of the north shall thenceforth cede without contest to the sole and absolute rule of Prince Davin, to be governed by him and his chosen consort, in perpetuity. Dawn. The word was a ticking clock inside my head. I had 6 hours to undo a lifetime of lies and reclaim what was mine. I smoothed out my gown, the pristine silk no longer a symbol of my love, but a casualty of their war. It felt like spilled blood against my skin, a promise of the vengeance I would exact. The girl who loved a prince and trusted her sister died in that cathedral. The woman who walked away would burn their world to the ground. They wanted a kingdom? Fine. I would give them a war, and from the ashes of their betrayal, I would build an empire. I had one night to destroy them both, and I would not fail. I didn't run to the archives. I stormed them. With Lord Kale trailing behind me like a shadow, I swept past the startled scribes and sentinels guarding the entrance. The great bronze doors, each carved with a map of the heavens, groaned open at my touch. Dust motes danced like frantic sprites in the beams of moonlight slanting from the high, vaulted windows, illuminating endless rows of scrolls and leather-bound tomes. This was the memory of my kingdom, the repository of every law, treaty, and lineage stretching back 1,000 years. But I wasn't here for the laws of men. I was here for the laws of magic. Kale grabbed my arm just as I reached the central pedestal. Lyra, what is this? A legal loophole? The king's decree is absolute. It was witnessed and sealed. I shook him off, my eyes fixed on the obsidian slab that dominated the room. His decree is a cage. I'm not looking for a loophole, Kale. I'm looking for a key. My fingers traced the inlaid silver circle on the pedestal's surface. What are you doing? He asked, his voice low and urgent. This is the blood seal. It hasn't been activated in 5 centuries. The magic is wild, unpredictable. I turned to him, my eyes burning with a cold fire he had never seen before. Good. My enemies are predictable. I need an advantage they won't see coming. Before he could argue further, I pulled the small silver dagger from the sheath hidden in his belt. Trust me, I whispered, and plunged the tip into my palm. A sharp, cleansing pain shot up my arm. I clenched my fist, squeezing droplets of royal blood onto the cold, polished obsidian. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the silver circle began to glow. First a faint shimmer, then a blazing light that cast stark shadows against the towering shelves. The seal drank my blood, and the ancient magic of my line awoke with a hum that vibrated in my bones. At the far end of the chamber, a tall, unadorned mirror, which had been as black and dead as a winter pond, swirled to life with silver mist. I stalked towards it, my bloodied hand held aloft. Show me the traitor, I commanded, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. The mist coalesced, sharpening into the image of my sister. She was in Davin's private chambers, a goblet of wine in her hand, laughing at something he'd said. The sight of her, so content in her treachery, stoked my rage into a furnace. You think you can steal my crown along with my groom? I snarled, my voice dripping with venom. The Celeste in the mirror froze, her smile vanishing as she heard my voice echo in her own room. She spun around, her eyes wide with confusion, searching for the source of the sound. Who's there? She called out, her voice thin and reedy. I leaned closer to the mirror, wanting her to see every ounce of my fury. You've stolen a title, Celeste, but you have no claim. I am the true heir of the North, and I challenge you. Try me, sister. Her face, reflected in the enchanted glass, cycled from shock to disbelief and finally to a dawning horror. Her wine goblet slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Davin appeared behind her, his expression hardening as he realized what was happening. What is this witchcraft? He demanded. Celeste's eyes were locked on mine, wide and terrified. Lyra, what are you talking about? A challenge? She stammered. What have you done? I've invoked our family's oldest law, I said, savoring the fear that was blooming on her face. Something our father conveniently forgot to teach you about. It's called the trial of succession. Davin paled. That's a myth, a children's story to frighten usurpers. It's no myth, Prince, I spat back. It's the magic that binds our bloodline, the power that protects this throne from thieves like you and whores like her. The seal has accepted my challenge, and my blood has accepted it on her behalf. It's a magical duel, sister dear, a fight for the right to rule. I let a cruel smile touch my lips. The best part is, it cannot be refused. The trial is absolute. One of us will be dead by sunrise. The other will be queen. The magic itself will decide the rightful heir. Celeste stumbled back, pressing a hand to her stomach, as the full weight of my words crashed down upon her. She hadn't just risked a political fallout, she had wagered her life. Just as the image in the mirror faded back to mist, the great archive doors burst open with a crash that shook the entire chamber. Kale, who had been standing in stunned silence, spun around, drawing his sword. It wasn't a scribe or a guard. It was one of Kale's most trusted scouts, his face pale and his chest heaving from a desperate run. "My lord! Princess!" he gasped, leaning against the doorframe. "Report!" Kale commanded, his voice sharp as steel. "Lookouts on the southern pass, my lord. They lit the warning beacon not 10 minutes ago." I felt a new dread, cold and sharp, pierce through the heat of my rage. "What is it?" I demanded, turning from the now dormant mirror. "More love letters from the prince?" The scout shook his head, his eyes wide with alarm. "No, your highness. It's an army. Prince Davin's banners have been spotted. A full legion with siege engines. They're moving fast through the valleys." Kale swore, his eyes finding mine across the vast, silent room. The meaning was terrifyingly clear. My duel with Celeste was a distraction, a sideshow. The true threat wasn't a magical trial set for dawn. It was an army of steel and iron, and it wasn't waiting. Kale's voice was grim, a death knell to my momentary triumph. "They aren't waiting for the decree's deadline, Lyra. His army already marches toward the northern gates." The royal archives felt a world away. From the wind-whipped battlements of the highest tower, the true nature of my predicament unfurled below me like a funeral shroud. The moon was high and cold, a merciless spotlight illuminating the valleys surrounding my ancestral home. It was no longer a valley of peaceful fields and forests. It was a sprawling military camp. Thousands of campfires burned like malevolent stars, their smoke coiling into the frigid night air. I could see them, the endless columns of men and horses, the dark silhouettes of siege towers against the horizon. Davin's banners, bearing the snarling black wolf of the southern reach, were planted in my soil, a declaration of ownership. They had surrounded my home, my fortress, the heart of the north, cutting it off from the world. Lord Kale stood beside me, his knuckles white on the pommel of his sword. "They move like a plague across our lands," he said, his voice a low growl of disbelief and rage. 10,000 strong, at least. Light cavalry, heavy infantry, and siege weaponry. He didn't assemble this force overnight, Princess. My reply was brittle, thin against the wind. He assembled it while swearing fealty to my father. He assembled it while whispering promises of undying love to me. Kale's gaze was grim. "The northern gates are thick, but they won't hold for more than a day against a force this size. His vanguard is already making probing attacks. What are your orders?" Before I could answer, a lone horn blast, sharp and arrogant, echoed from below. A path cleared through the center of the encamped army, and a single rider emerged, trotting his warhorse into the open ground before the main gates. It was Davin. He was clad head to toe in black, plate armor, his handsome face framed by a warlord's helm. The gentle prince I thought I knew, utterly erased. The man who had once brought me wildflowers and quoted poetry now looked upon my home with the cold, appraising eyes of a conqueror. He reined in his horse directly below my tower, a deliberate and contemptuous display. He wasn't hiding behind his army. He was presenting himself as its master, the inevitable victor here to accept my surrender. He was no longer the boy who had stolen my heart with soft lies and gentle hands. He was a wolf at the door, and he had come to claim everything. This was his true face, I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach. The charm, the tenderness, the love. It had all been a mask, a weapon wielded with more skill and cruelty than any sword. He looked up, his eyes finding mine across the distance, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. "Lyra, my sweet, naive Lyra!" His voice, magically amplified, boomed up from the courtyard, carrying over the wind and the nervous stamping of his horse. "Come down from your tower. There's no need for this ugliness. Open the gates, and I promise your people will be spared." Kale made a move to shout back, but I put a hand on his arm, silencing him. This was my conversation to have. "There was no need for treason, Davin," I called down, my own voice surprisingly strong, carried by the tower's own strange acoustics. "Yet here we are. You stand on my land with a foreign army daring to demand my surrender?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that bore no resemblance to the warm chuckle I once adored. "Treason? Oh, Lyra, this is just good business. You always were too trusting, too caught up in your fairy tales of love and honor." He leaned forward on his saddle, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone that was somehow more chilling than his shouting. Let me ask you a question, my dear, a simple one. Did you really think I loved you? Did you truly believe your timid affection was enough to secure a kingdom? Or did you ever wonder why I spent so much time consulting with your sister on matters of finance? His words were poison tipped darts. Your sister, your clever, practical sister, offered me twice the dowry your parsimonious father promised. This army, this glorious engine of my ascension, was paid for with northern gold she helped me secure. You offered me your heart. She offered me a throne. Which do you think a man like me would choose? As if on cue, a second figure emerged from the command tent behind him, riding a far more delicate palfrey. It was Celeste. She wore a gown of deep crimson, the color of blood and victory, and her face was alight with a triumphant glow that made my stomach churn. She came to a stop beside Davin, placing a delicate, gloved hand on his armored forearm. "He's right, sister," she called up, her voice sweet as honeyed poison. "You always saw the world through poetry and old songs. I saw it through ledgers and alliances. My enhanced dowry bought his army and secured his loyalty." "It's my kingdom's wealth you're bribing him with, Celeste," I screamed, my voice cracking with rage. "Our mother's inheritance, you traitorous bitch." Celeste's smile didn't falter. She patted Davin's arm, a gesture of ownership. "And I offered him something you never could," she added, her voice ringing with final, devastating clarity. She shifted in her saddle, and with a slow, deliberate movement, she rested her hand on her own belly, on a curve that was barely visible beneath the thick velvet, but was undeniably present. "I offered him something far more valuable than land or titles. I offered him a future. I'm carrying his son." She looked from Davin back to me, her eyes glittering with malice. "An heir." The winter wind howled around the crenellations, slicing through my gown, through my skin, through the very marrow of my bones. An heir. The word echoed in the frozen space where my heart used to be. A son. Their betrayal wasn't a matter of weeks or a sudden political opportunity. A child. That was the result of months. Months of them lying to my face. Of Celeste sitting with me while I planned my wedding to the man she was sleeping with. Months of Davin holding me, whispering promises for a future he was actively building with my own sister. Every shared meal, every knowing glance between them that I had blissfully ignored, every time he'd been called away on urgent state business, and she had been suffering from a passing ailment, it all crashed together into a single, horrifying tapestry of deceit. It was not just politics. It was a deep, personal, and meticulously planned conspiracy to ruin me, body and soul. They hadn't just stolen my fiancé and my crown. They had stolen my life story and rewritten it as a tragedy with me as the fool. The coldness inside me receded, chased away by a volcanic surge of pure, unadulterated fury. My grief curdled into something elemental and hot. My knuckles, already white from gripping the tower's stone ledge, tightened until I thought the bones might snap. My pain was a key, my rage a catalyst, and under my fingers, the ancient stone responded. The ledge, which had been cold and lifeless moments before, grew warm, then hot, as if a fire had been kindled deep within it. I looked down. The ancient interlocking runes carved into the parapet, symbols so old their meaning had been lost to time, began to glow. A soft, ethereal light, the color of a winter dawn, pulsed from the carvings, flowing up my arms, mirroring the fire now raging in my soul. The wind whipped my hair across my face, but I no longer felt the cold. I felt only the raw, humming power awakening in my veins and in the very stones of my ancestral home. The heat from the glowing runes didn't just burn my hands. It plunged into me, a torrent of raw power that bypassed skin and muscle to set my very blood on fire. A strangled cry escaped my lips as the magic surged through my veins, a disorienting flood of light and sound and heat. It was too much. My vision swam, the thousands of campfires below blurring into a smear of hellish light. The tower seemed to sway beneath my feet, and I staggered back, my hand flying to my head as 1,000 alien thoughts crashed into my own. It was the feeling of being struck by lightning. Kale rushed to my side, grabbing my shoulders to steady me. "Lyra, what's happening to you? Your hands!" "By the gods, the runes!" he stammered, his military composure shattered by the raw magic unfolding before him. I couldn't answer. My teeth were clenched against a scream as the power rooted around inside me, searching, demanding, awakening parts of my soul I never knew existed. It felt like I was being unmade and remade, all at once. The stone! I finally managed to gasp, my voice thin and reedy. It's burning! But it wasn't a destructive fire, it was a forge, and it was hammering my grief and rage into something new, something terrible and strong. The power searing through me was a key, unlocking doors in my mind that had been sealed since childhood. My own memories peeled away, replaced by a flood of ancestral visions. I saw flashes of other women, other queens, all with my eyes, all standing on this very tower. I saw a queen with fire-red hair call down a storm upon an invading fleet in the bay. I saw another, clad in armor of black scales, whisper a command that healed the blighted earth after a long winter. They were my blood, my line, the dragon queens of the north. Voices, soft as rustling leaves and powerful as avalanches, whispered in the chaos of my mind. The stone knows its own, one seemed to say. The blood remembers what the mind has been forced to forget. Then, the cacophony of voices and visions focused, coalescing into one single sharp memory. A memory I thought was a dream, a fairy tale my father had dismissed as childhood fantasy. It was my mother. I was a little girl again, no more than 6 years old, sitting in her private solar while she brushed my hair. The memory was so vivid I could smell the winter roses in the air and feel the comforting weight of her hand. "You have a secret, my little dragon," she had whispered, her voice a song. I remember giggling in the memory. "I'm not a dragon, Mama. I'm a princess." Her smile was beautiful and sad. "You are both, Lyra. You are a princess for the world of men, but you are a dragon for the soul of the North. It is the greatest secret of our line, and you must guard it well." She had knelt before me then, her eyes, the same color as my own, filled with a desperate intensity I hadn't understood. "Listen to me. The men of this court, even your father, they fear this power. They call it a curse. They will try to make you forget it, try to make you small. They will tell you that our line is one of diplomacy and treaties." She had taken my small hands in hers. "Do you know why this tower is the tallest in the kingdom? It's not to watch for armies. It's a perch. The stone is ancient, Lyra, far older than the castle. It is a conduit. It sings a song that only our blood can hear. One day, you may need that song. When all hope seems lost. When the world of men has betrayed you, you must come here. Lay your hands upon the stone, and let your heart speak. The blood will answer." "What will it do?" I had asked, my child's mind grappling with the immensity of her words. "It will remind you of who you are," she had said, kissing my forehead. "You are not just Lyra of the North. You are a daughter of the Dragon Queens. The fire is your birthright. Never let them extinguish it." The memory shattered, and I came back to myself with a gasp, the cold night air a shock to my lungs. King Aldrich hadn't just hidden my heritage. He had actively tried to erase it, to make me forget the truth of my own blood. He had let me believe my mother was a simple queen who died in childbirth, not the last dragon-blooded monarch of our line. I pulled away from Kale, standing tall on my own, the dizzying disorientation replaced by a profound and terrifying clarity. I was no longer shaking. The power humming in my veins now felt like it belonged there. It felt like coming home. "It wasn't a story," I whispered, looking at my hands, which still glowed with a faint, residual light. Kale stared at me, his expression a mixture of fear and awe. "Lyra, what are you talking about? What story?" I met his gaze, and he saw the change in me, the new, ancient power that now burned in my eyes. "My mother. She wasn't just a queen from a southern court, Kale. That was a lie my father told everyone. She was the last of the old line. She was a dragon queen." Below, in the courtyard, Davin was growing impatient with the light show. He spurred his horse forward again. "What sorcery is this, Lyra?" he bellowed up at me. "Another pathetic feminine trick to delay the inevitable? Drop the portcullis or I will burn it down with every soul inside." I stepped forward to the edge of the parapet, looking down at the man I once loved, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold pity. He was an insect, threatening a star. He thought he was playing a game for a throne, for a patch of land. He had no comprehension of the forces he had provoked. "This is not sorcery, you pathetic usurper," I called down, my voice ringing with a newfound power that made the very stones around me vibrate. It wasn't just my voice, it was the voice of the tower, the voice of my ancestors, the voice of the North itself. This is heritage, and you just made the biggest mistake of your miserable, grasping life. I raised my right hand, the one I had cut in the archives. I thought of my mother's words, of my stolen birthright, of the child Celeste carried as a weapon against me. I let the pure, white-hot rage well up inside me, not as a poison, but as a fuel. I focused it, channeled it from my heart, down my arm, and into my fingertips. And the magic answered. Fire, real as the stone beneath my feet, erupted from my hand. It wasn't a huge, uncontrolled gout of flame, but a contained, furious corona of silver-white fire that danced and writhed around my fingers, casting my face in a demonic, flickering light. It did not burn me. It was a part of me. The air crackled. Below, Davin's horse reared in terror, and even from this height I could see the utter shock on his face and on Celeste's. Kale fell to one knee beside me, not in allegiance, but in pure reflexive shock. "Gods above," he breathed. I looked at the silver fire licking at my fingertips, twisting and coiling like a living thing. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of recognition. This power was mine. It had always been mine. Davin thought his greatest mistake was underestimating my political will. He was wrong. His greatest mistake was far more fundamental. In his greed, he broke the heart of a princess, but in doing so, he had unleashed a dragon. He chose the wrong sister to betray. I looked down at his army, at the thousands of men and horses and siege weapons. An hour ago, they were an insurmountable threat, a wave of steel that would drown my kingdom. Now they were kindling. They were firewood for the pyre I would build. I finally lowered my hand, and the flames vanished, though the heat remained, coiling in my core. I turned to Kale, who was still staring at me as if I had grown a second head. "Get up, my lord," I said, my voice calm, but with an edge of command he had never heard from me before. "There is work to be done." He rose slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "Princess, what are you?" "I am what I have always been," I said, turning my gaze back to the valley. "I am the rightful queen of the North." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Davin spoke of his kingdom. He rules a pathetic little patch of dirt in the south. He thinks he can swallow the North, annex it like some fallow field. I let out a short, sharp laugh. He has no idea what he has just woken up. He and my dear sister wanted a prize. They wanted power. I clenched my fist, feeling the phantom heat of the dragonfire. My path was no longer about survival or even reclamation. It was about dominion. My ambition, newly forged in dragonfire, now dwarfed his petty conquests. I would not simply take back my throne. I would watch his piddling, insignificant kingdom burn to glass and ash. And from those ashes, I would build an empire that would make his pathetic principality look like a child's forgotten sandbox. The world would have a new dragon queen, and it would learn to fear her name. My newfound power was a compass, and it pointed down, deep into the mountain upon which my castle was built. The ancestral memories showed me the way, not to a door of wood or iron, but to a section of the tower's foundation that was seamless, solid rock. I placed my bloodied palm against it, the same hand that had awakened the runes. "Kale," I said, my voice calm and clear over the rising wind. "Gather what men remain loyal. Bar the gates. Reinforce the inner keep. Hold them off for as long as you can." Kale, his face still pale with shock, stared at me as if I were mad. "Hold them? Lyra, with what? My personal guard and a few dozen sentinels? We are hopelessly outnumbered. It's suicide." I smiled. a chilling expression that did not touch my eyes. You have your queen, and she is about to call her true banners. I closed my eyes, focusing on the hum of the stone, on the echo of my mother's voice in my memory. I spoke a single word, not in the common tongue, but in the guttural, arcane language of the first men, a word that felt like granite and fire on my tongue. The stone before me groaned, and with a sound of grinding continents, a doorway opened into the darkness of the mountain's heart. A dry, ancient wind, smelling of ozone and stone dust, washed over me. From the blackness, a low, earth-shaking rumble began, a sound that vibrated not in my ears, but in my soul. I gave Kale one last look. Don't let the walls fall before I return. Then I stepped into the darkness of the crypts, and the great stone door sealed behind me. The rumbling grew louder, and from the depths, pairs of vast, luminous eyes, like molten gold, blinked open in the gloom. The roars began as a low thrumming, then built into a cataclysmic chorus that shook the very foundations of the earth. The entire mountain trembled, and outside, Davin's soldiers stopped in their tracks, looking around in confusion and fear. Then the peak of the mountain behind my castle exploded outward in a shower of rock and ancient ice. 3 centuries of slumber were over. One by one, they took to the sky, their vast, leathery wings catching the moonlight, their forms more magnificent and terrifying than any legend had ever described. There were 5 of them, each the size of a small keep, their scales shimmering like jewels, obsidian, emerald, sapphire, ruby, and bronze. They circled the castle once, their roars a declaration of reclaimed sovereignty. Before one of them, the largest, a magnificent beast of shimmering bronze, broke from the formation. He swooped towards the tower where I had reemerged and landed with a ground-shaking impact that cracked the stone battlements. He lowered his colossal head, his golden eyes, ancient and wise, regarding me with an unnerving intelligence. There was no saddle, no reins. There was only the bond of blood. I climbed onto his warm, scaled back, my hands gripping a dorsal ridge, and with a powerful thrust of his hind legs, we were airborne. We soared high above the castle, the wind a roaring symphony in my ears. Below me, Davin's army was a carpet of terrified ants. I had no crown but the moonlight, no scepter but my own burning rage. I urged the bronze dragon into a steep dive, swooping low over the panicked soldiers. You want to play at war, Prince? I shouted, my voice magically amplified by the dragon's own power, booming across the valley like the voice of a god. The soldiers cried out and shielded their faces. You came to my home with swords and siege engines, daring to spill blood for my crown. You think this army gives you power? I laughed, a wild, terrible sound. Let me show you what real power looks like. On my unspoken command, the other 4 dragons descended. They did not unleash a sea of fire to incinerate the whole army. Not yet. That was too quick a death. Instead, they unleashed targeted blasts of flame, consuming siege towers in moments, turning supply wagons into funeral pyres and melting lines of pikemen into molten slag. Panic, absolute and primal, shattered their discipline. The orderly ranks dissolved into a screaming, scattering mob. Men dropped their weapons and ran, trampling one another in a desperate, futile flight. Davin, his face a mask of disbelief, was screaming at his men, at the sky, at the injustice of it all. What is this? Sorcery. Where did they come from? He grabbed a fleeing captain by the gorget. Hold the line, you coward. It is just an illusion. Stand and fight. But the captain, his eyes mad with terror, ripped himself free and fled into the night. Davin stared up at me, a figure of fury and fire silhouetted against the moon. No, 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 I heard him shriek, his voice thin with hysteria. The bloodline was supposed to be extinct. The mages swore it. They swore she had no power. My bronze dragon beat its wings, the downwash sending men and horses tumbling. I guided him down, landing with a ground-shattering thud not 20 yards from where Davin and Celeste were huddled, their horses rearing in terror. Soldiers gave us a wide berth, scrambling away from the colossal beast and the woman wreathed in fury who rode it. Davin drew his sword, a useless sliver of steel against a force of nature. Celeste was just staring, her face as pale as moonlight, her hand pressed against her belly. Did you know about this, sister? I called out to her, my voice dripping with scorn. Was this part of your ledger book calculations? Did you account for dragons in your dowry? Celeste shook her head, her eyes wide and glassy with a terror that looked different from Davin's. It was the terror of a fundamental truth being shattered. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames and screams. It can't be. Father told me. He told me you were dead. The words made no sense. Dead? I've been by your side our entire lives, Celeste. A constant thorn in your ambitious side. Not you, she cried, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. The power. The Queen's line. Father told me it died with our mother. He said the magic had passed you by, that you were empty inside. He swore to me that you were normal. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow, more stunning than any of their betrayals so far. Normal. Empty. He had lied to her, too. My own father, King Aldrich, had orchestrated this entire tragedy from the very beginning. He hadn't just hidden my heritage from me to keep me controllable. He had told Celeste I was a dud, a powerless princess with a valid claim but no teeth. He had painted me as weak to her, likely knowing her ambition would see me as an obstacle to be removed. He had pitted us against each other, two daughters in two different cages. He had wanted a quiet, controllable succession, one without the messy, unpredictable fire of the dragons. He would have preferred the kingdom fall to a usurper, allied with his powerless, politically minded daughter, than see his dragon-blooded child take the throne. The depth of his manipulation, his cold-blooded willingness to sacrifice one daughter for the sake of controlling the other, was staggering. He wasn't just a grieving widower or a cautious king. He was the puppet master who had set every piece on this board. As this devastating truth settled in my soul, I felt a different chill, one that had nothing to do with the night air. I looked to the east. The dark velvet black of the sky was softening. A faint, pearlescent gray was beginning to outline the jagged peaks of the distant mountains. Dawn. It was coming. The word sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. The royal decree, the trial of succession, the ancient magic I had invoked, the very power that had awakened the dragons and now coursed through my veins, was bound by a covenant as old as the mountains themselves. I had challenged for the throne, and the magic had granted me its power to fight that challenge, but the contest had to be decided by the time the sun's first ray touched the valley. My power, in its current overwhelming form, was temporary. It was the magic of the trial, a boon with a time limit. I looked at the chaos below, at the broken army and the two traitors staring up at me in horror. My second strike had been a success, but the war wasn't over. I realized, with a lurch of panic, that I had less than an hour to fly back to the throne room, to formally cast them out and claim my crown before the ancient magic faded, leaving me a woman on a dragon, but a pretender in the eyes of the law. The clock was ticking. I left my bronze dragon standing sentinel in the snow-dusted courtyard and strode towards the great hall, the screams of Davin's fleeing army a fading echo behind me. The massive oaken doors to the throne room were splintered, hanging crookedly on their hinges. Kale met me there, his face grim. They are all inside, Your Highness. Davin and your sister were captured trying to flee. Your father, the king, is by the throne. I nodded and walked past him into the heart of my kingdom. The throne room was a scene of beautiful devastation. The magnificent glass dome that formed the ceiling had been shattered, and shards glittered like fallen stars across the floor. Through the gaping hole, my dragons circled slowly in the pre-dawn sky, their vast shadows sweeping across the panicked faces of the assembled court. Nobles, soldiers, and servants were crammed together, a terrified audience for this final act. On the central dais, flanked by two of Kale's most loyal guards, stood Davin and Celeste, shivering and dirt-stained. And beside the empty throne of the north, looking small and impossibly old, was my father, King Aldrich. His eyes were wide, fixed on the draconic shadows overhead. I walked the length of the hall, my boots crunching on broken glass, my gaze locked on the three people who had tried to ruin me. I stopped at the foot of the dais and looked down at the dragon crown, right where I had dropped it an eternity ago. I ascended the steps, my movements deliberate and serene. The ambient magic in the room, thick with fear and my own draconic power, seemed to part before me. I ignored the whispers, the gasps, the palpable terror. I picked up the crown. It was cold, a simple circlet of black iron, yet it hummed in my grasp, a sleeping titan. I held it aloft for the entire court to see. As my power flowed into it, a halo of silver-white flame, the same fire that had danced on my fingertips, ignited around the metal, bathing the dais in a ghostly light. I turned my eyes to Davin, whose face was a mask of defiant hatred. "You stand in the hall of my ancestors," I began, my voice echoing with a supernatural resonance that silenced every other sound in the room. "You conspire with my own blood for a throne you have no right to, a power you cannot possibly comprehend." I took a step towards him, the flaming crown held before me like a weapon. "You dared to challenge a dragon queen?" My voice dropped to a menacing whisper that every soul present could hear. "You are an insect, Davin, and you have flown into the heart of the fire." Davin, ever the narcissist, spat on the floor. "Dragon queen?" he snarled, his bravado a pathetic shield against the impossible reality confronting him. "You're still just a lovesick girl playing dress-up in your mother's dusty myths. You think a few parlor tricks and those trained beasts make you a monarch?" He ripped his sword from the grasp of the guard beside him, the screech of steel a jarring offense in the tense silence. He leveled the blade at my heart. "I am the warrior here. I am the conqueror. Your father was wise to fear your mother's madness, and I see it in you now. I'll cut you down just like I did her. I silenced her ridiculous ambitions, and I will silence you." His words were meant to be the final, cruelest cut, a boast to shatter my newfound strength and reassert his dominance. He was claiming to have murdered the queen, my mother. The throne room erupted in gasps. Kale started forward, but I held up a hand to stop him. A cold, clarifying rage washed over me. The official histories, the story I had been told my entire life, was that my mother had died from a fever following my birth. Childbirth, a woman's battle. Davin's claim was an outrageous lie, a desperate, flailing attempt to wound me. "My mother died in childbirth, you lying, pathetic bastard," I started to shout, my voice ringing with righteous fury. But the words died in my throat. My gaze was inadvertently drawn to my father. King Aldrich, who had been watching the exchange with a strange, frozen terror, suddenly crumbled. It was not a grand, dramatic collapse, but a quiet, complete disintegration of his regal facade. His face, already pale, turned ashen. A terrible, guttural sob was torn from his chest, and he staggered back against the base of the throne, his eyes screwed shut as if he could block out the truth that had just been unearthed. He looked like a man who had been stabbed. I saw it then. Davin had lied, but he had accidentally stumbled upon a truth far more monstrous. All eyes in the hall followed my gaze, turning from the armed prince to the broken king. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more profound than any sound. It was broken by my father's weeping. He slid down to sit on the steps of the dais, his head in his hands, his whole body shaking with ragged, soul-deep sobs. "It's true," he choked out, his voice muffled by his hands. He looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes pleading with me, with the memory of my mother, with the gods he had forsaken. "He lies about the deed, but not the crime." He took a shuddering breath, his confession spilling out into the horrified silence. "She wasn't killed by a fever. I killed her. She died because I poisoned her." A collective gasp, like the wind being stolen from every lung in the room, filled the hall. Davin looked utterly baffled, his lie having been eclipsed by an even more terrible reality. Celeste stared at our father, her expression of triumphant greed curdling into one of confused horror. My father's words tumbled out, a torrent of guilt held back for 2 decades. "I had to," he pleaded, his gaze finding mine. "You didn't know her, Lyra, not really. She was magnificent, and she was terrifying. She spoke of conquest, of an empire of fire and blood, with our dragons as her legions. She saw this kingdom not as a home to be nurtured, but as a fortress from which to launch a war against the world. She was a storm, and I loved her, but I could not let her break our world." His confession painted a picture of a man driven to monstrosity by fear. He spoke of how he had procured a slow, untraceable poison from the southern continent, slipping it into her wine over weeks, watching the love of his life grow weaker, all while pretending to be a doting husband. I told her it was the pregnancy weakening her. He wept, his voice cracking. She died calling my name, begging me to save our child. He then turned his tear-filled eyes to Celeste. And I lied to you, my dear. I saw your mother's fire in Lyra, and it terrified me. So I told you she was empty, powerless. I nurtured your ambition, your practicality, hoping you would politically outmaneuver her, create a succession crisis that would allow me to set her aside. I thought I was protecting the kingdom. I thought I was a savior. He dissolved into pathetic sobs again. But I was just a coward. A murderer and a coward who broke his own family to pieces. He had not only killed my mother and suppressed my birthright, he had groomed my sister to be my downfall, all for the sake of a peace built on lies and murder. A chilling calm settled over me. My grief for the mother I never knew and my rage at the father I thought I did crystallized into a diamond-hard resolve. I looked from my weeping father to the stunned faces of Davin and Celeste, and I felt nothing. They were merely symptoms of a disease. I was the cure. I turned my back on my father, dismissing him from my world. My mother wanted to raise an army to forge an empire, I declared, my voice now devoid of all emotion save for an icy certainty. You feared her, and you murdered her for it. I raised the dragon crown, the silver flames upon it flaring violently. And now her daughter will finish what she started. With a slow, deliberate grace, I lowered the crown and placed it upon my own head. The moment the cold iron touched my brow, a wave of incandescent power erupted from the throne itself, from the very stones of the castle. The flames on the crown blazed into a blinding corona of white light that forced everyone in the room to shield their eyes. It was the ancient magic of the land, recognizing its rightful master. The power settled, the light receded, and the crown rested on my head as if it had been forged for me alone. I was queen, the first dragon queen in 3 centuries. I took my seat on the great northern throne, the ancient stone cold and hard beneath me. The power of the land flowed into me, steady and absolute. I looked down at the architects of my pain. Davin, I said, and my voice was the law. For your treason against the crown, for your conspiracy and your invasion of our lands, you are hereby stripped of all titles, lands, and honors. Your name will be struck from every record. You are no longer a prince. You are nothing. He opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. A shimmer of magic washed over him, and I could see the pride, the arrogance, the very identity he had built, being magically stripped away, leaving an empty, terrified shell of a man. I then turned to my sister, who was weeping silently. And you, Celeste, I said, my voice softening only slightly with a remnant of pity. You chose a ledger over blood. You sold your family for gold and a title. So you shall have neither. I made a gesture with my hand. You will go with him, into the wasteland beyond the southern mountains. The child you carry will be born nameless, a beggar's child in a barren land, and they will grow up knowing their mother chose the wrong side of history. Guards, their faces grim and loyal to their new queen, stepped forward. They hauled the now nameless man and the weeping woman away, their protests and pleas silenced by the sheer weight of my royal decree. My gaze fell upon my father, still huddled on the steps. I would deal with him later. For now, he could remain in the prison of his own making. The sun was rising, its first rays piercing through the shattered dome, illuminating the dust and ruin and the dawn of my new reign. With Davin and Celeste dragged from the hall, a tense and fearful silence descended once more. All that remained was the final festering wound, the man who was once my father, huddled at the foot of my throne. I looked down at him, not with the fire of rage or the ice of vengeance, but with a vast, weary emptiness. He was pathetic, a ghost already haunting the scene of his crimes. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Lyra, my child, I only ever wanted to protect you, to protect the kingdom. Protect it? My voice was quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent hall. You poisoned my mother. You lied to my sister. You tried to erase my very being. You did not do this to protect the kingdom, Aldrich. You did it to protect your own fragile peace because you were too small a man to stand beside a great woman. I leaned forward on the throne. You will not be executed. You will not be a martyr. Your sentence is far worse. You will live out your days in the western wing of this castle. You will have every comfort, and you will be utterly alone. Your only view will be of the empire your wife dreamed of, and you will watch it be built, stone by bloody stone, by the daughter you sought to cripple. You will live with what you have done and what you have unleashed. That is my judgment. He let out a final broken sob as guards pulled him gently to his feet and led him away, not as a king, but as the castle's first and most prominent prisoner. With all traitors now dealt with, I rose from the throne and faced the terrified court. The first rays of sunlight were now streaming through the shattered dome, bathing me in the light of a new day. You have witnessed the end of an age, I declared, my voice resonating with the power of the crown. The North has slept for too long under a reign of comfortable lies and quiet fear. Today, it awakens. I make you this promise. There will be fire, and there will be blood. There will be war. But from it, we will forge an empire worthy of our ancestors, an empire that will never again bow to foreign princes or yield to the whispers of traitors. I paused, my gaze sweeping across the faces of the nobles. Loyalty to this new crown will be rewarded beyond measure. Your names will be written in the histories we are about to forge. But treason, in any form, will be met with utter annihilation. This I swear on my mother's memory and by the fire in my blood. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, Lord Cale, my ever-faithful Cale, drew his sword and dropped to one knee, raising the blade in salute. His voice, filled with an unwavering conviction that cut through all fear, rang out, "Long live the Dragon Queen!" A beat passed, and then another noble knelt, and another. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its knees before me, a sea of bent heads and sworn fealty. The reign of fire had begun. 5 years later, I stood before a vast map table that filled the center of my war room. The room itself was the highest chamber in the tower, the same one where my power had awoken, now refitted with dragon glass windows that overlooked my sprawling capital. Cale, now my Lord Commander, graying at the temples but straighter and stronger than ever, stood opposite me. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice laced with the quiet satisfaction of a long and brutal campaign finally ended. "The last of the southern lords have surrendered. The banners of the Dragon Queen now fly from the northern waste to the shores of the southern seas. Prince Davin's former kingdom is now your smallest, most pacified province." I looked at the map, at the vast swath of the continent now colored in the black and silver of my reign. "It is not a province, Cale," I corrected him softly. "It is a reminder, a monument to the price of betrayal, for all other would-be conquerors to study." He nodded, understanding completely. "As you say, my queen." A young captain entered then, bowing low. "Your Majesty, a report from the Sunstone Waste Patrol." I waved him forward. "Speak." The captain cleared his throat. "Our scouts report seeing the Nameless One again, near the dead oasis." I felt a flicker of something, a ghost of a memory, but my voice remained even. "Davin, what is his state?" "Unchanged, Your Majesty. He wanders the dunes, raving at the moon and screaming a name no one knows. The desert tribes say he is mad with grief, haunted by the ghost of a crown he never won. The woman is still with him. She forages for them both." The captain hesitated. "And the child?" I asked, my voice softer now. "The boy is almost 5, my queen. A scrawny thing with his mother's eyes. They live on scraps. The tribes shun the entire family as cursed, touched by a vengeful god. They say the boy will grow up knowing only sand and sorrow, and that his mother chose the wrong side of history." I nodded slowly. "That is all, Captain. You are dismissed." Some nights, when the castle is quiet and the dragons are sleeping curled around the mountain peaks, I still have the dream. I am in a white wedding dress. The cathedral is filled with flowers, and Davin is smiling at me, his eyes full of love and promises. The dream is always so beautiful, so peaceful. It is a vision of a life I might have lived, a life of quiet happiness, of love and children, and growing old with a man I adored. I sometimes touch the scar on my palm, the place where I cut myself to awaken the magic, and wonder about that other Lyra, the one who was never betrayed, the one who never had to burn the world down to claim her place in it. The sorrow in those dreams feels real, a phantom pain for a life I lost. But then, I wake up. I wake to the chill of the northern air, to the immense power humming in my blood, and to the sound of my dragon singing my name to the rising sun, and I would not trade it for anything.